weirdos, welcome to my channel. So I just want to say before we start the video, if you hear anything in the background, it's because I have a fan going and I didn't want to get off my ass to turn it off. So here we go. Plus, we have a little guest. Yeah, she's so cute. Today's video, what we're doing is, so this is the second half of my browsing bundle video. I wanted to kind of talk about the books. I've read all of them now. It took me, I want to say, about like a month to read all of them because I was reading like a bunch of other things at the same time, so I couldn't like fully dedicate to reading them. So I got 5 different books. You saw them in the past, so I got 2 fiction and 3 non-fiction. Oh, someone's tired. It's like 3 in the morning. Welcome to my life. Let's talk about the fiction books first. I'm going to kind of go in the order in which I read them. The very first book I read actually was The Soul of an Octopus by Montgomery. As you can tell, I bought a copy of this book because I quite enjoyed it. Actually, it was more like I had a bunch of money to blow on books and I saw this and I was like, well, it was recommended to me by the library, so let's just pick it up. So I just returned the copy that the library gave me back to the library, and I really, really liked it. This was a really interesting look at octopuses, but also Montgomery did a really good job adding that personal like lens to it. There's a part where they talk about their process, like scuba diving and like reef surfing and all of that. I don't know what the quite correct term for it is, but that was really interesting. I found that to be like a lot of fun in terms of stuff to know. But I also felt like I learned a lot about octopuses in a like really, really interesting way that wasn't just like this is what happens like when they're born. I felt like it was really organic in the way that Montgomery talked about their interactions. So for instance, like was talking about their experience feeding an octopus, and that led to a natural explanation about how octopuses eat and how their tentacles are really all their taste buds. So when a fish goes through like all of their tentacles, that is a fish enjoying their meal. It was just really, really interesting and I really enjoyed it. And it's made me want to look more into octopuses. Like there's the documentary on Netflix, I think it's called My Octopus Teacher. I haven't watched it yet, but I'm very, very interested in reading it. So this one, out of all of the 3 nonfiction books that I read, I think this was my favorite. Yeah, just because it's kind of very sciencey, it's very up my alley, and I really enjoyed it. Then the next book I finished, it's not the next book that I started reading, but it's the next book I finished. That is The Feather Thief, and I do not have the author written down, but it's on the screen. You guys can read it. This book I tried reading once, and didn't finish it because it was due at the library and I just wasn't that intrigued / wasn't really like focusing on trying to enjoy the story when I first read it, or when I first tried reading. I got like 2 hours into the audiobook. This time I actually thoroughly enjoyed it. I really loved the context that the book gave to why feathers were so desirable. Like what is the history of feathers and like hunting endangered species or these wild species in order to have feathers for X, Y, and Z. It wasn't just fly tying, it was also like for hats. That was really interesting and kind of necessary context at the beginning of the book that I thought was interesting. And so basically what this is about one of the biggest heists in terms of feathers that has happened to a museum, where a young man went to the Tring Museum and stole hundreds of rare birds. And I think that this book brings up a lot of interesting questions about like collections in terms of like museums have. How are those collections managed? I in no way work at a museum. However, I'm kind of anal about how I like keep my books. I have detailed spreadsheets. I have multiple spreadsheets, and I've added some like logic to the spreadsheets. And I know how hard it is to like go through and keep that updated. And that's only something with about like 500 instances in there. Imagine having a collection that is thousands upon thousands, if not millions of like books long, like trying to make sure, we have everything. When is the last time that we've done like a status check? I usually don't do status checks to make sure that all my books are on my shelves because I know when I rent out things. However, like with it's just it was very interesting. And I really liked those discussions. On top of all of that, beyond just the discussion of like the actual crime, the author goes more into his own personal experiences trying to figure out where the missing feathers were. And I thought that was really interesting. There isn't mild spoilers, but there isn't like a nice like wrapped up tidy bow at the end, which I really liked, because honestly, like, you can't find the feathers. It's just not possible, and you'd have to read the book to figure out more about why exactly that is. But I just thought it was a really interesting, intelligent look at like that whole world. The Feather Thief is described a lot as like a true crime, but like not murder true crime. And I quite enjoyed it, because sometimes learning about crimes that devastate research and the future of research is really, really sad, but they can be much more palatable than reading a book about like a massacred family. I also really, really enjoyed that one. So I would say that was like the second one I enjoyed the most out of all of the nonfiction ones that I read. The next book I finished was actually Race the Sands. This is by Sarah Beth Durst. It's deceptively long. Like, this looks like a fairly 200 to 300 page, maybe 400 page book. It's like 500 pages. So it's the stuff is really thin. This book, obviously, I liked it. I bought a copy. I didn't really know much about going into this book, and I'd never heard of this book before. One thing I really, really appreciate about this book is that it's a standalone. That doesn't happen very often in fantasy worlds, and I didn't figure that out, that it was a standalone, until I turned this book into the library, and I was just so happy, because there weren't any cliffhangers or any other bullshit that I had to deal with, waiting to get my hands on another book. I could just enjoy a story that could have spin-offs. So what is this about? This is about a young girl, and she's put in this dire situation. Her parents are kind of assholes, and they spent a lot of money getting her the education that she has had. However, she gets kicked out of school. The school she was in was specifically a training school to read your souls, to figure out if someone is a good or a bad person. It's not that binary, but you can read the soul and see if they had done bad things, if they murdered someone, your soul or your aura will be more damaged than someone who didn't do that. So that's a school that she went to. She was kicked out because she didn't pass some of the tests. And her parents are pissed because they spent all this money, so they decide to sell her off to the highest bidder, basically marry her off to an abusive person. So she doesn't want to do that, so she's really, really desperate. And that is where she runs into this other woman who's also in a desperate situation, because her daughter is going into that same school, and the price is really high, and she's down on her luck. She's had a really rough run-in with work, had a lot of failure. She's kind of on the brink of losing everything. And it's these two women coming together to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and be successful. So where does the fantasy thing come in? Because I made that seem quite normal. However, it's not. In this world, there's reincarnation, which I love. That is so underutilized in more Western fantasy, which I wouldn't necessarily call this Western fantasy, but it's just not utilized a lot in Western fantasy, and I think it is an amazing trope. It can be really, really interesting. Anyway, and I really liked how it was done here. People can be reborn, and depending on how good your aura is determines or your soul is, how healthy it is, that determines what you're going to be reborn as. So if someone is really, really horrible, they will be reborn into something called a keyhawk, and a keyhawk is basically a monster. What happens with these keyhawks, when they die, they can only ever be reborn into keyhawks, with the sole exception of someone who wins this big race. And what the people do with these keyhawks is race them, just like you would race horses. And it's really, really intense, because these are monsters. They will murder you if you mess up. It requires a lot of concentration to ride them and to train them and all of this stuff. If you win this big race, your keyhawk can be reborn, and you as the rider who's riding the keyhawk gets a bunch of other privileges. And so these two women that we're following, The young girl, she decides that she's going to become a Keyhawk rider. And the older woman, she is a trainer. And the reason she's so down on her luck is because she's losing races. She lost a racer, like her racer died because they lost concentration. And she's just losing money. I really enjoyed it. I don't want to say much more because you really shouldn't know much more. However, it gets a lot into politics in this world. And I really enjoyed that. There was a moment where I was reading it was super political intrigue towards the end, and I just stopped and I was like, I can't believe they did that. I can't believe they did that. That's this one. I really, really enjoyed it. Anyway, moving on. The next book I finished was 18 Tiny Deaths. This is all about this woman named with the last name Lee, and she was super heavily invested into the growing of forensic science. She was instrumental in the creation of the FBI and all of this stuff. But the catch was she couldn't do any of the medical work herself because of when she was born. She was born in the early 20th century. So women just did not have a lot of access to a lot of the medical education that she needed in order to become a doctor who could become a coroner. She also was very fortunate to have a lot of wealth. So what she did is that she worked a lot with Harvard and basically bribed Harvard into setting up a training program for police officers, and she did a lot of lobbying to people to transition from elected coroners to actual people who've gone to medical school coroners. And a lot of her ideas have been put in place, and a lot of them still haven't. So that was really interesting. But my thing with this book is I just thought it was kind of boring. I didn't find her life to be all that interesting. Oh, also, before I forget, the reason it's called 18 Tiny Deaths is because she decided to build all of these miniature crime scenes, essentially, that were to scale. So it was 1 inch was a foot. And she just spent an absurd amount of money building these. And they're still in use today, which I thought was really cool, but you can't see them anywhere because, they're still in use. Yeah, I really thought it kind of dragged a lot towards the beginning of the book because just not a lot of interesting medical stuff was happening. Because, it's this biography, so it's telling about her young life, and she didn't really get super heavily invested into this. I mean, she was always interested in the medical field and crime solving and stuff, but it wasn't until she was much later in life where she actually took on some more agency and built these miniatures and got more involved in the Harvard program. So yeah, that was kind of my big thing with this book. Also, with the book itself, printed very large and spaced out. So I felt it could have been a lot less number of pages if stuff was just kind of made a little bit smaller, just printed kind of a normal book, here's a spacing of a normal book. It was maybe a 3/4 of the stuff on this page would be on a page of that book. It was just weird. I never experienced that with a published book before. So it made it look like it was really, really long, but it was really not. That's just a weird side tangent about this book. How I feel about this book, it was my least favorite. It was probably about a 3-star read for me personally. Just kind of felt very apathetic, and I was also a little bit disappointed because when I filled out the form, as I showed you, I specifically asked for true crime that didn't involve murder, if that makes any sense. This kind of followed it, but kind of didn't, because the whole conceit is that you are learning about all of these murders. So you don't necessarily get a ton of grisly court cases, but I was just but I kind of wanted true crime that wasn't who's the murderer. I forget exactly what I put. I think that one was probably the one I enjoyed the least out of the 5. That's kind of all I want to say on that one. Last one was The Bear and the Nightingale, and that I actually finished tonight of this filming, so I haven't had as much time to digest it as some of these other books that I've read, and this was the other fiction pick I was given. And obviously I haven't bought it, but I also haven't been given enough time. So maybe I will buy it, but honestly, probably not. So this book is very atmospheric. It really does a good job of setting up this Russian cold winterland that you're going to be spending a lot of time. You're in a very isolated village for the majority of this book, and you really feel that. And it does a really cool job of pulling in all of these different Russian folklore ideas. I was Googling up the wazoo. I was like, what is a domovoy? I do not know. I do not understand. Please explain this to me. And that was really interesting because the book did like a good job of like explaining stuff, but not overly explaining it to the point where you're like, oh, like, what the heck? So it didn't like beat you over the head, like kind of explaining like these cultural things that maybe not everybody is familiar with, like me. But it still did it in a way where you could kind of like gather like what the purpose was without having it like written out explicitly for you, which is really hard to do. And I think that they did that really, really well. And so I wasn't too lost. Like I was just like, let me do a quick Google search. What's a domovoy? Let me just figure that out real fast. But really, those were unnecessary. I really, really liked those aspects of it. And, good job introducing, like, the folklore that, again, isn't understood by, like, most people reading this book, unless, like, you are Russian. I really liked that. It was very, very atmospheric. However, my kind of biggest thing was I was largely bored throughout the majority of it. I felt like just a lot of like nothing was happening. Like I felt like there was a lot of setup to like the plot, but there wasn't a lot of plot. So you spend a lot of time like introducing like all of these myths and things like that, which is fine. Like I didn't mind that because those myths like tie into what happens later. But you just spend a lot of time like figuring out like introducing the stepmom, and I was like halfway through the book and we're still doing like this setup stuff, and I'm like, where's the plot? Yeah, and it doesn't really like start picking up in terms of like plot until I want to say like the last like half or like the last third, which isn't inherently like wrong. I just wasn't expecting that. I guess maybe I just had weird expectations. The whole conceit is that this village kind of goes through like crisis of like food shortages and like really cold winters and like fires, and this girl Vasya has to go and solve the problem of her village, save her village. So I thought it was going to be more of like an adventure of like her going off and like a quest, to save the town or whatever, and that's not what it was. There wasn't really much adventure to it. And I don't know, maybe that was just me going in with wrong expectations, but the whole time I'm like, okay, we're setting up all this stuff. When are we setting off for this adventure? And it doesn't really happen. That was weird. The characters. There's this priest, Constantine. He's an asshole. Fucking hate him. The moment he showed up, I was like, you're gonna be a dickhead. And he was a dickhead. He, like, repeatedly tries to... Oh, and also he's super dumb. He's, like, super, like, gullible. He's, like, tricked by, like, the oldest trick in the book, in my opinion. But it takes so long for Constantine to figure that out. I was like, you're just fucking dumbass. Like, Constantine, I don't want to give too much away, but he's just an asshole and tries to kind of, like, uproot everybody's lives. Like, not physically move them, but, this town is steeped in like their own cultural traditions that are separate from Christianity, and he basically just tries to say like, oh, nope, well, Christianity is like XYZ and your stuff is demons. And I was like, that's shitty. That's not a good thing to do. That's quite an asshole move of you, Constantine. And I have many other issues with Constantine. Love the sexual repression though. I'm just like, yeah, serves you right, you're a priest. Like, just don't do that. Anyway, so yeah, I think in terms of like the fiction books, there's only like two. I enjoyed that one a little bit less. But it was a really interesting like pick. I really enjoyed like just the in general world around it and like the atmosphere of the book. So thank you for watching my very rambly video about these books that I read. How you doing? You want to go to bed? She's like, it is so late. It is my bedtime. I want to go to sleep. I know, me too, but you know what, we're here, and melatonin has not kicked in yet, so that is it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a comment, let me know. Did you Did you read any of these books? What do you think? Which one sounds the most interesting to you? Like, comment, subscribe. You guys know the whole deal. Also, get your vaccine shot. The Delta variant is no joke. Ugh, it's scary. So get vaccinated. Do your part. All right. Baby says bye.